everybody. I think we are all set to start.
All right.
Let me just say a few words before I give the microphone to Dr. Nihal Pitigala, and welcome everyone to the second day of the Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue 2022. Yesterday we had an excellent session. Actually several sessions and excellent discussion, and we want to carry actually those discussion in today. We have three very interesting sessions today, and we want to carry forward those discussion today. And towards the end, we have a closing session. We will provide a kind of summary of the discussions of all these of the discussion of Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue, second Bay of Bengal Dialogue. So this session is on infrastructure connectivity in Bay of Bengal region, and we have Dr. Nihal Pitigala, lead economist, Washington Business Dynamics and Enrich Global. He's chairing the session. And also we have panelists, Dr. Probir De, Professor ASEAN India Center at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS India. We have Dr. Ganeshan Wignaraja, we heard him yesterday too, Senior Fellow, Institute for South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. And we have Dr. Paras Kharel, Research Director of South Asia Watch on Trade Economics and Environment, Southeast from Nepal. And I myself too, I'll also be joining as a panelist in this session. So I'll be helping Dr. Nihal Pitigala in conducting the session in the sense that they are definitely the participants. You are very much welcome to share your views or questions in the chat box, or during the open discussion session, you can raise your hand and also share your comments or questions. I'll be helping the session chair, Dr. Nihal Pitigala, in conducting the open discussion session. So over to you, Nihal, and we look forward to an exciting session now. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Salim. That is a very helpful opening remark. I will, without further ado, I'll get into the subject matter. The first thing I would like to say, I just want to ask whether you can hear me clearly. I just want to make sure that I don't.
Yes, it is. Fine.
Then we are good to go. So infrastructure, as you may have sort of heard from the panelists for the last few sessions, if you were involved, has come often in different forms. If you were to strictly look at the region, South Asia region and the BIMSTEC at large, the infrastructure needs for this region is the latest estimates coming out of the ADB using a multi-country model, covers around something along the staggering 5.4 trillion over a period of they have projected on the baseline up to 2030, which puts it at roughly around $365 billion a year. So it's a massive gap. I don't know exactly as of today, what is the current level of infrastructure commitments and activities by all the donors, including the countries themselves. So this is roughly about 7.6% of the sub-regional GDP. That's the kind of challenge that infrastructure generally sort of poses for this region. One of the central parts of there are several aspects of this infrastructure one could talk about. Power and transport are the center of those demands, and accounting for about 52% and 35% respectively of the total infrastructure investment needs from the baseline projections. I would sort of focus on the type of transport and trade related infrastructure. For example, the way I would sort of start this discussion is just to give a little bit of background to say that South Asia, it costs more. For example, 15 to 20% more to trade with India trading with Bangladesh as opposed to India trading with Brazil or Germany. That's based on the trade cost estimates that are established recently on the revised trade cost approach that they have adopted. They have differentiated from the old trade costs to the new trade costs, looking at interregional versus interregional. So this is a base is interregional, and how much in interregional or bilateral trade costs that sort of impinges upon transaction cost across South Asian trade. On average, it's about 130% for the SAARC region. So you see how staggering it is. And if you're a businessman, if you work at the micro level and look at the transactions internationally, 5% margin, 10% margin, or you may be able to play around it, but if then it exceeds 15%, 20%, you're out of the picture in terms of transaction costs. So you won't be able to close the deal that you have. But what has happened is in the BIMSTEC region that they have developed this BTILS to try and address some of them centrally, mostly the transport cost, but in a revised program supported by an ADB, that they have developed this transport connectivity master plan that looks at understanding the evolving needs and the demands, basically looking at both soft and hard infrastructure, the intermodal, multimodal linkages, which are central to it, port development, maritime, aviation, trade facilitation, whole gamut is absolutely necessary in order to sort of move and sort of get to, chipping away from this heavy bilateral costs that the traders incur in the region. Now, the BBIN is a great example of that extension. So let me sort of set that a theme and a stage, and I'll sort of get to our first speaker. Obviously, we have a distinguished panel in the list. So first, I think we are getting, was it Dr. Prabir? No, I think we are getting to Salim. Interesting. So Salim doesn't need any further introduction. Salim is a full professor. He's a friend and an avid and a prolific writer. He's at the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, senior research fellow at the Manchester, UK. He's an excellent modeler. I have learned a lot from him. We interacted with him over the last few years, and you have heard about him in many different forms. So let me hand this over to Salim. You have what, roughly 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes?
Oh, thank you, Nihal. Thank you so much. We can actually have, since it's a 90-minute session, each panelist can have 8 to 10 minutes,
fine.
I think, and then we have another 30 minutes for, I think,
yeah.
May I request the participants, if you can kindly mute your microphone, the other participants, apart from the panelist, it would be really great so that we don't hear any kind of background noise. Thank you so much, Nihal. So let me start by saying that, I thought that to discuss few issues related to concepts, and then I will get into the issues related to the Bay of Bengal region and also the kind of challenges we are facing in. So when you talk about the regional infrastructure, actually we're talking about regional public good, because it's a kind of, this public good is extremely important when we talk about regional cooperation integration. And this public good, and especially this regional infrastructure, we talk about a heavy emphasis is on the kind of physical infrastructure, basically which connects the trade and investment. But we should not also forget about other forms of infrastructure, because they work very, very strongly to translate this all effort into kind of effective integration process. The social infrastructure, especially in the health and education and other areas, and also now the emerging the digital infrastructure, the way things have been developed over the years, especially with the development of IT and other related issues. So I think when we are talking about this infrastructure and connectivity, we should also keep in mind the kind of background context. Mr. Shirajul Monir, would you please kindly mute? Shoaib, would you please take care of this? So these kind of things are extremely important when in the Bay of Bengal region, in this BIMSTEC region, when we are talking about this infrastructure and connectivity. Now, I think Dr. Nihal, he rightly pointed out, and especially when you talk about this state of infrastructure in BIMSTEC, it's not really great. And there are also huge divergences across countries. And with respect to physical infrastructure, with respect to social infrastructure, even with respect to digital infrastructure. We can go beyond even these three. Now we are talking about, yesterday we talked about financial architecture, financial infrastructure, how we can integrate those. I think those are something definitely. Earlier, we used to think about it, these are more at the advanced stage of integration. But now we realize that if we don't address these issues, there would not be any meaningful integration. We talked about this currency swap and many other things, but now we realize that, the countries in this region, they need to talk about these issues very strongly. But if we focus on these very conventional aspects of infrastructure, fully agree with Dr. Nihal Pritikala that the infrastructure gap is huge. And he also provided some estimates of this infrastructure gap, especially the amount of investment which is needed. I remember 2 or 3 years back, while I was doing a study for UNESCO Bangkok, we looked at we tried to construct an infrastructure index. I know there have been several attempts in doing so, but we tried to see that the countries in Asia Pacific, the kind of advanced countries, and their state of infrastructure, based on this constructed index, and actually UNESCO came up with a report on that. And then the countries in South Asia and some of these Bay of Bengal countries, they have a huge gap in this, even in order to achieve that state of advanced countries in Asia Pacific, let alone the countries in Europe and other countries, so other regions. So you need a huge, investment and a huge kind of effort in achieving that level. So I think this is something when it comes to physical and related to trade and investment, we are seriously lagging. I know that probably we will not talk much about the social infrastructure, especially how the countries, they spend very low on health and education on average in this region, which is no way conducive for reaping the benefit of trade and investment integration. But we are seeing some kind of progress in the digital infrastructure. And probably this is because of the technological investment. The digital technology is getting cheaper. But what we are observing, there is a huge disconnect that the countries, they are investing on digital infrastructure, they're developing their digital technology, and probably they have been achieving in certain kind of progress. But since with respect, there is no connection between among these digital infrastructures, physical infrastructure, social infrastructure. That's why we can't expect that these countries will actually be able to benefit out of this whole efforts. What really concerns me is that there is a kind of entitlement failure, and I wrote about it a long back in the infrastructure case, because policymakers in these countries, they emphasize quite a lot on the big projects, big infrastructure projects, where looking at the small areas where targeting how the SMEs are, whether they are benefiting out of it. Yesterday we heard from the ambassador from Thailand. She was talking about the concerns of the SMEs. Also, when you talk about the export diversification, this is a big challenge in many of the Bay of Bengal countries, and many of the emerging sectors and potential sectors, they suffer from serious infrastructure gaps, and especially the way they can't connect to the main infrastructure streamline. So even when you talk about physical, social, or digital. So what we observe that the countries, they're investing quite a lot on mega projects, big projects, building huge kind of infrastructure. But the concern is whether the emerging sectors or SMEs, are they benefiting out of it? So I think this is a concern probably we'll need to address quite extensively in the future. Now, Dr. Nihal Pritikala talked very rightly about this kind of high trade cost, especially because of this high trade cost and because of the poor connectivity. Many of the non-tariff issues, which are legitimate, we know that UNCTAD came up with a very excellent work on this non-tariff measures, and they kind of documented and they coded it. And when we did a very extensive study in South Asia, by countries, and we found that many of the non-tariff measures which are imposed on bilateral trade, even in the BIMSTEC countries, they are legitimate. You can't really ignore them. But because of the poor connectivity, because of lack of trade facilitation, because of poor infrastructure, many of these legitimate non-tariff measures turn into non-tariff barriers, and because of these procedural complications. And And these countries in Bay of Bengal region, the BIMSTEC countries, they are really a sufferer of this because mostly they trade through the land ports, and we know that the land port infrastructure is very, very poor. So how we can address these concerns? I know that there are some efforts which are happening in India. They are developing those ICPs, integrated checkposts, but we are not seeing the kind of matching effort on the other side. For example, in Bangladesh, if you go to Benapol, Petrapol, you will see that on the Petrapol side, things have been developed, the infrastructure is very good, but on the Benapol side, our side, it's not really happening. So if we have some development on the one side, but not on the other side, and if you don't really get the right kind of synergies, then I know that, my point is that the trade cost would not be reduced. I know Dr. Probit knows quite a lot on this. He has worked quite a lot on this. Probably he can reflect on this issue more. But my last couple of points is that when it comes to this infrastructural development and this connectivity, the role of national government and also the development partners are extremely important. But at the same time, we are seeing very emerging geopolitics. And I should not say emerging because it was there from the very beginning, but the changing geopolitics, especially the tensions in Myanmar, the India-China issues, which also really work, I would say, inhibit the kind of the progress we want to make in the connectivity. And also at the same time, we heard yesterday, especially one concern was that when you have trade facilitation, which reduces trade cost, but that can also have some kind of what we call the small country fear, because the revenue officers in the smaller countries like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Nepal or Bhutan, they may think that the trade facilitation is actually leading to import facilitation rather than export facilitation, where the import cost is getting reduced and where the import will increase. There will be surge in import. And if you can't generate revenue out of it, then the countries may lose out. So I know that these kind of concerns are very much there. So Dr. Ganeshan Wingaraja very rightly yesterday, he was citing the case of the ASEAN, on Southeast Asia, where the small country took the initiative for the larger integration. But in this part of the world, we haven't seen that kind of effort. For example, countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal, or to some extent Sri Lanka too, they've always kind of was conservative with respect to getting into liberalizing their trade regime and also, taking the larger initiative for integration. So I think in this case, the larger countries here in BIMSTEC region, India and Thailand, they are the larger countries. They need to take out the initiative and also kind of, erase this kind of fear of the small countries. So I'll conclude by saying that there are several agreements, there are several steps which have been taken in this BIMSTEC. And we heard yesterday from some of the leading speakers from this region too. But they need progress, they need substantial progress that they need to be finalized too. And as the coastal shipping agreement, some of the BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreement, these kind of things can really help in reducing transaction costs, trade costs, and also the kind of developing the regional public good, what I mentioned earlier. I think if we can do that, this region would be immensely benefited out of it. Over to you, Dr. Nihampithika. Thank you. You have to unmute.
Very much, Dr. Salih. That is a very good all-round perspective of what the infrastructure need is. I think I particularly like the fact that you touched upon especially the public good aspect of things, which we haven't sort of really dealt in the BIMSTEC region or in the South Asia region for that matter. The public good dimension has not been at a country level spoken of. So it's important that the public good dimension of the country level takes place now through different forums. The second aspect you alluded to is social infrastructure. I think it's extremely important for sustainability development goals. And I would sort of extend that to mention about now the Paris Climate Agreement is there. There's this additional layer of demand to comply with measures to augment infrastructure to comply with the Paris Climate Agreement. So that's another little bit of complexity and a necessary one. That ties into the social aspect. And lastly, which I mentioned, is the trade costs aspect within the region. And And I presume that what you're getting at is just like what is mirrored from yesterday's discussion. Look at where the incremental measures can be taken. Some of them are soft infrastructure. A digital infrastructure, for example, can be exploited to full extent, and then it's a new sort of additional dimension that now the BIMSTEC is thinking of. I think the infrastructure plan also has that. So with that, great. I'll leave to the floor for questions if anybody has any questions.
Nihal, can we take the questions after the panel? What do you think?
Oh, you want to do that after the panel?
Yesterday, actually, we did that. We initially the panelists spoke, and then we rest the next 30 minutes for the question answer.
Then we'll probably have some of the answers too. So next we bring in distinguished Professor Prabir Dey. He's from RIS India. He's a coordinator for Asia Indian Center. He's a good friend of ours. We are getting to know each other even more, annoyingly sometimes, but I think it's all in good spirit. He is also visiting fellow at the ASEAN Development Bank, the Tokyo, and he's also a prolific writer, and he's very well respected economist in the region. Over to you, Prabir, for your brief session.
Thank you, Nihal, and namaskar. Good morning to everyone. What Nihal started and Dr. Raihan alluded further. I mean, I'm going to give a kind of a laundry list, because this is a panel discussion summit very soon. And I think more people who have joined in this morning hours from the region and abroad, they would be like to know that what kind of scenario that we will be drawing for the next 10 to 15 years. So if I may start what Dr. Nihal Pitigala was referring to, the ADB forecast, and some of the early number, I am and my colleague here also doing some analysis that if by 2030 onwards, what would be the requirement of the infrastructure investment across countries? And this is very easy analysis. Any graduate student can do it. There's no need big skill and big modeling. So if our regional GDP, if it has to reach the 10% growth plus, and presently, as you know, that Bangladesh is the fastest growing economy in the Bay of Bengal regions. So what I found that 12% of the GDP, the regional GDP, has to be there for the infrastructure investments. And the numbers coming, which the ADB forecast that Nihal was referring to, is a huge number. I mean, I'm not going to quote that. That's useless telling 10 trillion or 5 trillion requirement. Those will be academic discussions can have. So the point can have later, but the point I'd like to make here, the requirement for the infrastructure investment in the region is a staggering number. And now the challenges because of the COVID, post-COVID scenario, plus several wars, supply chain resilience, breakdown, and etc. And environmental aspects, the investment need for the region has been far more than what it used to be. Given that 7 Bay of Bengal countries, Mr. Chair, as you know, that these are the 7 BIMSTEC plus Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, because they also share the Bay of Bengal water. Technically, we have actually 9 members in the Bay of Bengal. But if we may pick up the 7 BIMSTEC countries, in the 7 BIMSTEC countries, what we see that the progress for the last 25 years, yesterday's discussion, that it's not very much what I found in the name of connectivity is a moderate development. And the presentation that I have been doing in the 25 years of BIMSTEC, and as you know it very well, that is very difficult to implement given the structural scenario in these member states. It's very difficult to implement regional programs because it is a top-down kind of thing. Had that been a bottom-up, that every 7 members are discussing their national plan, keeping in harmonization to each other, linking their programs, then it could have been different. Since that doesn't happen, so master plan of connectivity, which you are referring, that he talked about in more than 135 billion investments across 70 projects, etc., etc. This is a fantastic initiative by the ADB. The leaders going to sign it in the coming summit, and probably near thereafter there could be more projects coming in the regions, provided that some of the conditions we meet. But if I may go a little beyond of the BIMSTEC Master Plan connectivity, and Mr. Chair, you rightly said that BTILS, and thereafter it has been updated. So little bit amount of the BIMSTEC Master Plan is already a bit old, and in today's, when we talk about a supply chain resilience, or the new value chain arrangements, which we're speaking up at different levels, then we need to recast our connectivity programs, infrastructure connectivity program for the regions, and that's what the objective of the sessions. So if I may pick up the two, and normally any kind of the policy planner, they will pick up hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure. If I make up first, where the Bangladesh is actually leading in soft infrastructure, and many of the countries, they are, because of the WTO trade facilitation agreement, because of Kyoto Protocol, revised Kyoto Protocol international commitments, they have already done some bit of other soft infrastructure in the regions. Only the missing component in large is that interoperability aspect, connecting each other's on soft infrastructure. For example, paperless trade, UN CPTA, United Nations cross-border paperless trade, which Bangladesh has signed from the regions. Others are still negotiating or in the review process. In the paperless trade agreement, can we have something like regional understanding in the regions? If it is, for example, if I go a little further, Mr. Achud Bhandari, who is also participating, and everyone, they know that every member countries in the Bay of Bengal, they have their customs portal, which for handling, documentations, handling payments, etc., etc. Can we connect them? So that's what the regional collaboration, regional harmonization, regional linkage is very important, which is presently is not there, for which a strong political push is required, by the way. Then we go for another one, which the training and capacity building program, which Mr. Chair, that SANEM, USAID, and many international organizations, ADB, World Bank, they are heavily into the training capacity building program, and they have big plans. So that's fantastic initiative, and that should be more and more going towards the border, by the way. Another one, which I think the next 5 years, the member countries of the Bay of Bengal, they will be engaged in negotiating the text for and the protocols for motor vehicle agreement. BIMSTEC Transport Corridors Motor Vehicle Agreement, which is being discussed based on the trilateral highway going from Kathmandu, Thimphu, Kolkata, Dhaka, all the way to Bangkok and beyond, etc. So these three things are primarily the low-hanging fruits for the soft infrastructure, which need to be, further, which need to be taken up for projects, which need to be taken up for guidance, etc. What about hard infrastructure? Because war kind of breaking the supply chain, there are disruptions in different forms. All these required the hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure to be, restructured. It is in a dynamic form. It's not necessarily the fixed kind of supply chain exists for all the time for supplying on goods or services from one point to another. So as you have seen that shipping companies today, yesterday I was giving a lecture to the shipping companies in Delhi. So all the shipping companies, goods now moving from Egypt and all the way to the Europe, from India's subcontinent, they're high insurance premium now they're charging. Why? Because of Ukraine war. And the insurance premium is so much is that the firms, because they will pass it on to the exporters or importers. Since exporting is done by FOB basis and import is from CIF, so it's basically charge it on the importing country. So they are unable to, pick up this kind of, high rise in the cost. And if the cost goes up, as we know very well, goods become incompetitive, it loses its market and trade collapse. So there is the way forward is the change coming out with a new type of supply chain. A new type of supply chain means that it's giving a resilience to the trade, to the networks. So here in the BIMSTEC countries, what is the advantage? They are geographically connected. More global disruptions. I would look at it this way. It is an opportunity for the regional organizations to pick up the momentum and do something bigger which is for the region and also for globally. In that way, Bay of Bengal has a strong role. I think coming summit will give us some directions. One is that corridor master plans that all this they have identified. Let's pick up some of them. Not necessarily we have to pick up a huge, holistic, big basket. With just some of the corridors in the regions, some projects in the border connectivity. We have been talking about it, that border need to be a coordinated. Everyone has done kind of a special arrangement for the border management, border trade I'm talking about. So this is another project. On the maritime front, I'm sure Dr. Ganesh Vigna Raja sir will allude to us more and more on maritime front. But to me, that coastal shipping agreement, which talks about that region flag holder vessels with a standard given by the Lloyds, they can apply from one port, for example, Chittagong all the way to Colombo, and from Colombo all the way to any of the ports in the regions without any kind of restrictions. That means the domestic service line is given. But that would help many of the garment manufacturers in Bangladesh to pick up, some kind of warehouses in the Indian coast, particularly eastern side. That means there could be kind of an horizontal expansions of the garment manufacturers or any kind of, that they are in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh. So these are the new projects. Last but not the least is, see, the goods that we are producing in the regions, there is also a transformation. Mr. Chair, you know it, that this is moving from a labor to the capital. So maybe open sky in the cargo, that's another opportunity for us. This is where the Sri Lanka, they can lead us. And on the digital front, I'm not going to see a detailed kind of a discussion on the digital technology and digital economy. Can something we discuss, or the leaders can give us the direction that e-commerce, that the several portal based on which we do that trade and commerce and due to the requirement, how they can be connected to each other. So these are some quick thoughts on today's panel from my side. I thank you and all the panelists and all the participants for joining. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabir, for that excellent roundup of what you basically put it as a roadmap for some incremental, early, low-hanging areas. But infrastructure is obviously nothing is very low-hanging, because you hang with it for a little while in order to get things done, right? But what is interesting in your roundup is to bring this soft side a little more prominently, especially post-COVID, bringing the digital infrastructure discussion of trade facilitation from the digital and e-commerce side, where there are a lot of unexploited. Now, I recall yesterday's discussion that Rupert Chada sort of highlighted. I mean, the low-hanging fruit is, a catchy word for a lot of us when we start thinking about it. We're talking about it for a really long time. Infrastructure, it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think by bringing this soft aspect of things, you can basically narrow down some parts to paperless trade, looking at where, so how would, I want to sort of come back and ask from you, if you were to do that, where do we start? Do we do the B2B kind of approach, or do you think of the public good itself? Because you can think of the B2B side in order to prioritize something. From the other thing that you mentioned is that given the supply nature, resilience for supply nature, supply chain resilience, what could BIMSTEC sort of can look up to mitigate those aspects of it? So these are all very thought-provoking ideas, Prabir. So we'll come back to you a lot more to discuss and exchange. Then we will move on to the next session. Thank you. Our next speaker is obviously my good old friend Ganeshan. Now, Ganeshan, some of you already met. He's a non-resident fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies and at the National University of Singapore. He's a senior research associate at ODI in London. He has a visiting appointment. He's an adjunct at Research and Information System of Delhi. He works very closely with Prabir. They know each other very well. He's an expert and also another prolific writer in development in general and in trade as well. That's a short introduction. Over to you, Ganesh. Looking forward to hear you from.
Thank you very much, Nihal and Salim and colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be here talking about infrastructure in the Bay of Bengal. Now, what's very nice in following Prabir is that he sets out all the issues in some sense. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative because I know Nihal likes a bit of spice in his Sri Lankan curries. And I'm going to talk a few issues which are slightly contrary to what Prabir says so that we can have some fun on the panel. And I'm going to talk sort of from a macro and a infrastructure kind of point of view, but go a little bit beyond as well. The first point I want to make is that the point Prabir made, that financing infrastructure in BIMSTEC is challenging. And he alluded to this very large figure that the ADB and others have come up with about infrastructure finance. Now, I find the concept of the needs very interesting, but I find the gap an even more interesting idea. That is the difference between the needs and current investment levels, okay? And that gap issue is very interesting. Now, this gap appears to be increasing over time. That means that countries are not spending enough and the needs are rising much greater. Now, as Pravi said, studies vary a lot in their estimates of what's done of these gaps. Now, if you look at the regional aspect of this, I've done some back of the envelope numbers that puts the infrastructure investment gap at the regional level in BIMSTEC at something like $120 billion per year until 2030. Now, why that becomes interesting is that is about a third of the GDP of Bangladesh, right, Salim? I think I've got that right. 324
yes, roughly,
billion.
yes.
Roughly a third, right? So it's a big number just for the regional bits, right? Now, we're not talking about all the national bits within countries that matter, right? Now, you know, it's a kind of a imaginable figure, right? When you think of that one third, and by the way, that 120 billion is bigger than the GDP of Sri Lanka, which is 88 billion. Yeah. Now, when you boil it to that, now of course, you know, this number is probably an underestimate, right? It doesn't take into account, for instance, the large estimate we have to do if we want to get 5G going, as people have said, the fifth generation technology. Nor does it adequately capture the multimodal format that we are interested in South Asia and in BIMSTEC countries of road, rail, sea, and so on. But we kind of hope with the master plan that will come out of the summit that we will have more accurate estimates of this gap at the national level and also the priority projects, and we can then distill this estimate. So one is this number is large, but it's doable. It's kind of logically doable, okay? If we have the right financing mechanisms. The second point, which is kind of related to the first, is that the economic benefits of regional infrastructure exceed the financial cost. Now, I did some work a couple of years ago with Mike Plummer, and Prabir also was part of that exercise. And what we found was that if you bring South Asia and Southeast Asia together, you have an 8-to-1 ratio between the economic benefits relatively less, but sees greater benefits from these investments. Southeast Asia has to invest more, but the benefits proportionately are less. So this is the point I think Nihal and also Salim have made, that we therefore have a big premium on building mutual trust in the region amongst countries, because there's a real risk of market failure or institutional coordination failure in regional projects. We also have to look at private-public partnerships as an important financing vehicle, because governments alone don't have the money. Even if you take my figure of $120 billion, this is bar India, of course, to make this investment. And then we have to have this institutional coordination. We talked yesterday about upgrading the BIMSTEC secretariat. There are 7 directors and so on, but the budget is very small. They don't have enough delegated powers and so on. And we have to also open up for trade and investment. The third point I want to make, and I might stop after this point, if that's okay with you, Nihal, to allow time for discussion, is that the hardware and the software have to be combined. And what Prabir said, I absolutely agree, that the trade facilitation agenda makes a lot of sense. This means, in addition to the agreement on paperless trade, we've got to really crack on with the customs reform. And these are kind of partial and half complete. And also to get this paperless trade. And there is a proposal, I think, on the table for a comprehensive integrated gateway in BIMSTEC countries, bringing maybe national single windows together. There's some dispute whether we should then have a single window being imposed from outside as a parallel system. But whatever route we take, there are many advantages. It can reduce trade costs. It can reduce particularly rent-seeking behavior. We know this is a problem in South Asia. Many estimates suggest that rent-seeking can be quite high and amount for a significant part of trade costs, and can also promote digital transformation. But there are 3 issues that need practical solutions. One is the operational issues. We have the challenge of user fees, interoperability issues, mutual recognition of rules, standards, and a common regulatory framework. So these operational level issues, the detail is in the small, become large if we're going for this paperless integrated system. A second important issue, which I'm sure Nihal would be very interested in, is this issue of rising crime, cybercrime. Okay? And we have hacking of integrated systems that is there, often by actors outside the region. And one expects that the Russia-Ukraine conflict may lead to an increase in cyber attacks and possibly cybercrime. And so we have to make investments in world-class cybersecurity in a regional integrated gateway. And that's going to be quite a cost for the small countries. Estimates of the amount you have to do on cybersecurity are quite large in relation to project costs of this type. The last point on this paperless system integrated is that we need aid for trade really to support the LDCs and the small states in BIMSTEC to adopt these integrated, be it the better national system or adopting the larger system that comes from the sky in the smaller countries. And really, India and Thailand, I think, have to really step up in bilateral assistance as well as multilateral system. So those 3 points, I think we need to look at these estimates of infrastructure investment gaps more carefully, and my estimate is that these are affordable. We need to look at the benefits and costs of these projects, particularly the regional ones, and build a mutual trust. And last, we have to look a lot at the software. I'll leave it there, Nihal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh. That's a nice complementary to what Barbara sort of mentioned. The only thing I would sort of look at out of the 3 you mentioned is that when you think of the gap, we were thinking, going back to this glitchy of the low-hanging fruit, is the software aspect of things, I presume, are not the major part of that need, because the structural infrastructure needs generally generates quite a lot of finances, I think. But also the demand to meet those needs are much larger. So it looks like we are sort of reaching consensus on that there are areas that we could, under BIMSTEC umbrella, can reach some early harvest programs to try and sort of make a dent into the transaction cost, and digital connectivity is a critical part of it. So that discussion of the gap, I think there's a lot of work going on, and you mentioned about the multimodal, intermodal. For example, the USAID is paying a lot of attention, as some of the others at the World Bank, on this internal connectivity through multimodal linkages. Not only that, you require services linkages, services support activities that can generate regional or local agglomeration like freight villages. So USAID is very keen on sort of supporting, and we already have a few programs on either pipeline development or feasibility studies. With that, yes, let's move to thank you very much, Ganeshan. Exciting. The last speaker is Dr. Paras Karel. Now, Dr. Karel is at the Swati in BIMSTEC. He's an economist, several decades of experience in policy-relevant research. He has been with the South Asia Watch on trade, economic, and environment, obviously Southeast for a decade or so. He is the current research director there, and he holds a PhD from economics from University of Melbourne. His research interest and publication spans from regional integration, gains from trade, applications of structural gravity models, and you have an interesting topic to discuss today. Over to you, Dr. Karel.
Thank you, Dr. Pitigala. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So, let me begin by referring to yesterday's inaugural session, where it was argued that if no progress is made on trade liberalization under BIMSTEC, then the grouping must have a plan to focus on some other major areas, and connectivity could be a saving grace of sorts. So I'll be focusing on the more traditional physical infrastructure connectivity part, bringing in some perspectives from landlocked countries and least developed countries. Now, connectivity has special salience for the two landlocked countries of BIMSTEC, Nepal and Bhutan. In fact, their only link to the Bay of Bengal comes from the undeniable, unavoidable hard reality that they are dependent on seaports of coastal nations abutting the Bay of Bengal, and they have to rely on transit through Bay of Bengal countries if they want to access other seaports, be they in Bangladesh, which we are yet to use, or the seaports on the western coast of India, even if the seaports on the western coast of India or the western coastline of India may or may not technically be part of the Bay of Bengal, although they are very much an integral part of India. These landlocked countries want better, efficient, predictable transit, whether it is made available through bilateral, sub-regional, regional, trans-regional, or multilateral routes or arrangements. Now, if BIMSTEC can deliver something on connectivity, then it would be worthwhile for landlocked countries to expend negotiating and related capital on this venture of BIMSTEC. Now, during a series of discussions we at SOTI had with private sector in Nepal, when studying the possible implications of graduation from LDC status in 2026 and the resulting loss of trade preferences in countries, for example, the European Union, a point that came up repeatedly was that trade costs are high and reducing them are key to being competitive. Now, bilateral arrangements and BBIN potentially cover transit through Indian and Bangladesh seaports and also cover road-based or multimodal trade among BBIN countries, right? So BIMSTEC connectivity should be more than that to add value to the connectivity drives already underway, assuming that they also take off. Now, coastal shipping connectivity between India, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, right? They are not at the top of the mind of landlocked countries regarding what they hope to get most from BIMSTEC immediately. But these can, of course, help if they reduce their trade costs of trading with the rest of the world. Now, one obvious potential or value-added connectivity measure that BIMSTEC may deliver, and what the media, especially the Indian media, have been harping on, is that landlocked countries transiting through India and Bangladesh by surface or inland waterways may be able to enter Myanmar and then move on to Thailand and onwards to trade with Southeast Asia. Now, yesterday I came across a news story that quoted an Indian politician as showcasing Mizoram state in India as a gateway between South Asia and Southeast Asia through the Kaladan multimodal transit and transport project. Now, the media and think tanks in India especially continue to invest considerable hopes in connectivity via Myanmar. There is, however, little or no discussion of the imperative to have Myanmar on board. Is it really interested to serve as a critical and I would say indispensable link in the South Asian dream of advancing connectivity with Southeast Asia? Now, Myanmar civil society engagement in track 2 discourse on BIMSTEC is absent, as is evident from the absence of or near absence of participants from Myanmar in this webinar, as well as in last year's edition. Here, I think the government can take a lead. The Myanmar regime or Myanmar government's predisposition or disposition to BIMSTEC or disposition to integration between Myanmar and South Asia will be influenced by how South Asian governments, especially I think India, treat it, whether they interfere in their internal affairs or not, whether they engage in grandstanding, along with powers outside the region on Myanmar's internal affairs or not. And I am highlighting this because Myanmar is a critical link. Otherwise, we can just talk about, BIMSTEC from a South Asian perspective. Now, the interests of landlocked countries like Nepal are pretty mundane. For example, improvement in the infrastructure on the Panitanki side on the Nepal-India border in eastern Nepal, the only route for trade with and through Bangladesh, improvement in the conditions in, say, the Kolkata port, access to alternative ports, especially in the western coast of India, which would reduce the time and cost of trading with countries to the west, be it West Asia or Europe or America. And this will help us, even if there is no headway made in free trade agreement in BIMSTEC, right? Because this will reduce our trade costs with trading with other countries outside the region. But who cares, as long as our trade costs are, gone down. Simplification of transit regime, operationalization of rail-based transit facilities via India for Nepal to access Bangladesh for bilateral and transit trade, right? So what can BIMSTEC do? My final point. It can, of course, plan infrastructure development in a coherent manner. It can monitor it. It can create gentle but sustained pressure to steer countries towards implementation in a patient manner. Of course, it is not a funding agency or an implementation agency, as I understand. But when planning, I think it would do well to take into account the structure and pattern of existing economic relationships within and outside the narrow BIMSTEC region and their likely directions, where China is at the center. Hence, tapping the resources potentially available from no source, including the BRI, should be treated as a taboo, given the huge infrastructure, investment gaps. And finally, it is critical, which has already been mentioned by others also, it is critical that transport and transit regime and trade and transport facilitation measures, the software part, complement the infrastructure part. I pause now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll, for that thought-provoking perspective coming out of a landlocked country. You raised some very striking but also very relevant issues about the connectivity and the modes of connectivity, and whether bringing Myanmar as part of the land link towards the East Asia, actually one of the motivations. Obviously, we have a member Thailand, and also Myanmar is part of that membership. These are some of them are very delicate issues, but at least in terms of connectivity, I could say that there are measures or there are programs in motion in India, especially related to waterway transport, that has completely taken on board the aspect, the transit aspect, linking both Bhutan and Nepal into seaports, and also linking internally with India as well. So there is an element of a lot of the multimodal transport linkages that has been sought after and been worked upon, has a very essential reference to the transit dimension and the needs of a country like Nepal. Let me leave it at that. I think there are a lot of others, including the panel, probably come back to this particular topic. And should we now open it for questions and answers, Salim? What would you like?
Yes, Nihal. I think we have around 35 minutes. We can use this time for the question and answer.
Okay.
So if we can, dear participants, you can post questions on the chat box, or if you want to speak, please raise your hand and share your views or comments or questions. But at this moment, I can see one question, Nihal, for Dr. Probit De. Kaji Imdadul Haq, he wrote in the chat box that please let me know, is there any initiative taken to include Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore in BIMSTEC? So Dr. De can answer, and also Dr. Vigna Raja, he can answer too.
Shall I?
Yes, I think, why not?
Okay, Mr. Chair and Dr. Raihan, just to, I don't want to, say that whether these three countries to be part of BIMSTEC. Maybe there is, as you know, that in the BIMSTEC constitution, the charter is to be signed. But if you look at the agreement when BIMSTEC was set up, it is on everything on consensus basis. It is not by the voting, right? So it is very difficult to induct a new member, in the BIMSTEC. So what I meant by that, my statement, is certainly there are three at the Bay of Bengal countries, which reaches the Bay of Bengal water. That way the definition goes for Indo-Pacific, present definition, the Indo-Pacific, same way I said it. But there could be some programs like engaging the Bay of Bengal countries, observers for activities. Step away. This is, I think, I could only say. I can't say that the BIMSTEC FTA is there, so let's do a BIMSTEC plus kind of thing. So only I suggest that let these three countries actively engaged in BIMSTEC cooperations and as observer or as a dialogue partner, whatever it is. Sorry, I stopped like that. Thank you very much.
May I supplement, Prabir and Nihal?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So Prabir, I think, has given a very good answer. The point I would make is that open accession, in principle, is a very important idea if we want regional organizations to be, living entities, right? Otherwise, they tend to become capture and clubs in a close sense. One very important thing that you see from the ASEAN experience is, although they have pathways to membership through being observers and so on, that route can be quite tortuous for countries to join. And I know this from Sri Lanka's own experience of wanting to join the ASEAN. So I think BIMSTEC really should be looking to having open accession, and not least of which the three countries mentioned would bring in significant resources in financial terms, and also ideas, and are critical, as Prabir said. Thank you.
Salim.
Dr. Subit Nakandala, Mr. Subit Nakandala, he wants to speak up.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Nihal, Salim, Prabir, and Ganesh. I think it was a very rich discussion. I just wanted to put some thoughts onto the question raised. I totally agree with what Prabir and Ganesh said. But yesterday also we discussed in detail. In fact, our keynote speaker, Dr. Debroy, also dealt extensively on the historical aspects of the Bay of Bengal. So naturally, our submission is that Indonesia and Malaysia, at least Indonesia and Malaysia, should have. We were discussing eastward kind of expansion of BIMSTEC, but when we started this kind of discussion with the establishment of the Secretariat, many members felt yes, there is a rationale and there is a argument on that, but let us first consolidate the gains of BIMSTEC. I think for last 25 years, we have now a Secretariat, we are going to have a charter, and we are going to have a number of important agreements, so that we can certainly, if there is a problem with the open accession, as Ganesh said, which is very, very, very right, because that open accession will be an impetus for harnessing and expanding regional cooperation and integration in any any regional, any prospering regional organization. So I think this we have come to the point where we should create a kind of a dialogue with at least my submission to Salim and Prabir is that the next Bay of Bengal Economic Forum, we can certainly invite some of the academics and intellectuals from these countries in at least to exchange views, because the idea of establishing the Bay of Bengal Economic Forum is to provide a kind of platform to exchange views and, of course, to provide some policy parameters and policy inputs to the member states and the Secretariat. I think this we'll need to think very seriously. I totally agree with Prabir and Ganesh on that submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sumitha. I think, yes, Nihal is back.
Yeah, I was wondering, we can throw this question back into Sumit. Sumit will be in a better position to answer. One of the things that we were, as panelists, discussing among ourselves, the group, is that Thailand is at a leverage to link eventually. The ultimate objective would be to link with the East Asia, with East Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. But you have to do it in the context. India already have an agreement with ASEAN. Bangladesh is probably interested in having an agreement with ASEAN. Individually, you have interest in having it out there. But collectively, the principles basically points out to, if you have a collective sort of approach to ASEAN, it would be optimal than individual countries were to do it. But that process is already on. So that's one of the things we need to think. How do we leverage BIMSTEC as a way or India's Act East or Look East policy, or Bangladesh Act East or Look East policy, or Sri Lanka's at some stage? How best to do that? Observance is a good idea. I think it's a transition towards the greater, perhaps ASEAN BIMSTEC eventual, maybe some stage in the future. How would that help? What are the experience of being an observer? What was the transition in other forums? How they have transitioned from being an observer to a member? So those are the things I think would be.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yes, we have in the chat box two more or few more comments. So let me read out. So Vinod Menon wrote, says that Dr. Parashkar's intervention is very insightful. Connectivity must also be in convergence of regulatory, financial, technical, telecommunication, and digital mechanisms to create shared vision BIMSTEC. Maybe Paras can elaborate a little bit more on that. And then Dr. Christian Ploberger from Thailand, Bangkok, he was asking that his question, what are the expectations of Indonesia either joining BIMSTEC or playing a crucial role in the Bay of Bengal in general? After all, Indonesia seems to get more interested on Bay of Bengal process. So this is a question. And Arnab Ganguly, he wrote, in recent years, there has been a focus on sub-regional integration. For example, the BBIN subgroup. Each of such sub-regional integration require the countries following certain protocol for transit and transport facilitation. For example, the vehicle specifications and emission standards to be calibrated. Given that it is important for BIMSTEC to coordinate with other sub-regional groups, so what we do not end up with different standards for different sub-regional groupings. So these are the questions put on the table. So who want to start? I just want to very briefly respond to Arnab Ganguly's point. I fully agree with him. BBIN motor vehicle agreement, which especially this BBIN subgroup, which was actually the SAARC motor vehicle agreement, if I'm not wrong, which was prepared to be signed by the SAARC, all leaders, But we know that the kind of dynamics which took place, then the 4 countries in the SAARC, they decided to go for this BBL. And we also know that there is not much progress there. But I fully agree with you, Arnab. But Arnab, do you want to say something or elaborate something on that too, please? I read your whole paragraph, but it is for you to speak up. Yeah.
Thanks, Salimda. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you and others after such a long time. So you see, basically my concern was that there is a BBIN subgroup. There's a motor vehicles agreement coming for that to facilitate trade and transit among these countries. Now, this calls for certain vehicle specification. It calls for certain, say, the customs subgroup agreements. Then there will be certain digital infrastructure that needs to be put in place. The protocols had to be set for those. Now, suppose for BIMSTEC, there are many countries, and many of them have their own, their own agreements to facilitate trade among them. Now, BIMSTEC, if say BIMSTEC comes up with us with certain protocols, which is different from what the BBIN countries are already implementing, or it's something that the Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, that subgroup is coming with a different protocols. What will happen in the end is BIMSTEC comes with something different from all these things, and then there will be a lot of time that will be required then to remodulate all these agreements, the protocols, standardizing them, and then make them operational. So my point was, take learnings from these subgroups where they are standing, what are the kind of agreements they are presently implementing or thinking about, and then look at the regional perspective as a whole. So that BIMSTEC also keeps on informing these subgroups that, okay, you have come up with this set of protocols, but maybe if we go for this kind of protocol, then there is a possibility of larger sub-regional trade and integration. So that's my point.
Thank you. Arnab, he works with the Cars International in India. So if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salimda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I tend to agree, but probably he's in a much better position to answer this question.
No, this is the comment, and I fully concur with Arnab and all other panelists and former Secretary General. This is indeed, very much required and a priority for any kind of sub-regional level greater understanding, deeper integrations. Just earlier this week, we had this BBIN motor vehicle agreement meeting for the text finalizations and thoughts, and Arnab Ganguly, they might be knowing better whether this has any progress or not. But I think this pollution, this Indian changes of motor vehicle standards, all those need to be all coordinated. Otherwise, when we go for, and as he rightly said, when we go for a negotiation, as it's happening in BIMSTEC MBA, or we call it trilateral motor vehicle agreement, for the information of the chair and other participants, as you know that the trilateral highway, which is other name is BIMSTEC corridor, BIMSTEC highway, going from here and there to Southeast Asia. Primarily 3 countries, India, Myanmar and Thailand, they have been setting up. There's lots of hope in it, but the motor vehicle agreement is now in nowhere, because the certain kind of a road standard in Thailand, the truckers and the associations, they have been denying the rights for the vehicles which will be coming from the rest of the BIMSTEC countries to Southeast Asia. So these are the issues need to discuss upfront, so that we don't waste our time while after signing the MOU or agreement. Another great example I can put it here, and this is the great GMS CBTA, GMS Cross Border Transport Agreement, which took almost 2 decades for ratifying the protocol, and it is a Thailand which is actually kept on holding this entire CBTA for almost a decade or so. So in short, taking from Dr. Arnab's comments and others, this is where a forum like this, a session like this, can give right directions. I won't say a very strong word, right direction, some directions in more an inclusive manner to the policymakers and the political leaders. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nihal, I can see Sumit, he has raised hand. Sumit, you want to say something?
Yes.
Do I have do we have time? I don't want to.
Yes, we do have time. So no worries.
Right. No, just wanted to take what Prabir said at the last. The time taken to negotiate some of these agreements. Now, it takes. I think it is very difficult to do a fast track approach on some of these agreements, especially motor vehicle. Now, we also need to remember ESCAP took how many years to finalize the intergovernmental agreement on Asian Highways and Transition Railway Network. I think they started these two projects was I think both were started or commenced as early as the ESCAP was established in Bangkok. So it took a lot of time. Finally, it was finalized, or maybe I think it was open for signature and subsequent ratification in 2012. So it takes a lot of time. It's very unfortunate why these agreements are taking such a long period of time. Maybe one has to, of course, enough literature is there already available on the transport and connectivity, why it is so important. So this is something that we need to look into, that why this delay. I agree with Prabir, but then I think there is a fatigue also within the governments in doing so. I thought that I should share this. Thank you.
Also, for the information of the chair, if I may, and Dr. Rayan, there is a question in the chat box, and also I've seen our friend from Nepal who has joined, who represents the Nepal Customs, and I can see him if he may be invited to share something, because he is the person who is handling the soft infrastructure more as a person in the ground level. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Why not? If we can identify the person, Prabindra, if you can suggest. Will be speaking, Prabindra? Yes, please. I can't. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and introduce yourself very briefly, please.
Yeah, very nice discussions going on. I joined a little bit late because I have been traveling outside. But, when BIMSTEC comes into consideration, we have seen a lot of problems that in implementing the BBI and MV itself. I just came to know that, there was some event in Delhi at the moment and some outcome must have come. But I personally being, representing the private sector in the freight forwarder sectors in Nepal, the major problem that I see is that, until and unless we take all the policies within the regions into, we come into an agreement in the policies, and then the, automation system that we want, needs to be studied, and then the level has to be equal among all the countries, as well as the infrastructure that are needed for, having such seamless transportation and passenger movements within the BBI region also needs to be taken into consideration. So I think there is a lot of groundwork that is needed to be done at the moment in order to make this happen, because to make BBIN happen, it has always been a big challenge. We agree, and then again we disagree. So before we agree among anything, my suggestions and my experience is that, first we would like to see whether it is economic, the cost effectiveness is there or not, and whether the infrastructure, the automation, and the policies are in line within the all countries. That's up from my side at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nihal, if we can go back to Dr. Paras Kharel and Dr. Ganeshan Vigdaraja to get their views too. If you
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So first we can hear from Paras, please.
Thank you, Salim. So I'll just try to address briefly a comment about, connectivity must also be in convergence of regulatory, financial, technical, telecommunication, digital by Mr. Vinod Menon. Now, yes, I agree. With that. But to link it with, my focus on infrastructure connectivity, this BBIN MBA, which is now BIN MBA with Bhutan opting out, that is also an attempt towards regulatory convergence. It's not really about infrastructure. We are in a way trying to align regulatory systems of countries in terms of road rules, signs, size and weight of vehicles, rules governing drivers entry and exit, designation of ports and routes for cross-border vehicle movement. So that's a way in a tentative or ginger steps towards regulatory convergence. Now, once this is implemented, and Rajanji, who is a researcher as well as as a rich experience in freight forwarding area, as he just said, if certain issues in BBI and MBA that he has observed are addressed, I think that will also offer us a lesson in moving towards BIMSTEC MBA, because after all, BBI and MBA, I see it as a subset of the BIMSTEC MBA, because the major stakeholders from South Asia are countries for which it is important, basically India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, just from the motor vehicle agreement perspective. All right. So how this BBIN or BIN MBA is implemented, I think will also guide us as to the implementation of BIMSTEC MBA. Thank you.
Dr. Ganeshan, yes, please.
Thank you, Salim. So on this question of common standards being there in BIMSTEC in line with BBIN and SARC and so on, sure. I mean, in a Cartesian sense, that's a very useful thing to have, right? When you're transport planning or thinking of multimodal. But that said, when you look at East Asian integration, what you see is really, this whole process moving at multi-speed, multi-track, multi-speed, okay? And the very fact that you've got BBIN doing something and hopefully will progress to an agreement early, puts pressures on other types of regional organizations to follow suit. Now the concordance may not be perfect, but at least you're getting agreement, right? And then over time, you can upgrade. And I think that's what I take away from what I have seen in East Asia, which has proceeded on different tracks. So I think it's better to actually have some process than not. On this interesting question of Indonesia and joining BIMSTEC or being part, I think that would be very nice because, you would have this localized value chain, which I think you talked about, Salim, earlier on, and that could be very nice. Indonesia is a big exporter of commodities. India is increasingly a player in pharmaceuticals, in certain kinds of manufacturing, and so on. And I think that could be very nice to have a kind of a South-South value chain, particularly in food processing, in pharmaceuticals, some bits of electronics and auto. The Japanese are relocating some of their chains to Indonesia. So I think that could be very nice. On the policy side, many kind of people have observed that Indonesia has been a bit careful or quiet, if you like, on its own role in the ASEAN process. Although ASEAN is housed in Jakarta, as you all know, it has not been as vocal as some of the countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and so on. So I'm not quite sure how they would want to participate with BIMSTEC. And I know for sure that on the FTA front, Indonesia is keen on PTAs with some of the South Asian countries, partly for the palm oil export, and in exchange for a few other commodities. But so one has to kind of see, but I can see the logic from the private sector-led integration. The policy-led side, I'm not so sure upfront. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ganeshan. So, Dr. Nihal, we don't see any other question. We have a comment from Achyut Bhandari. He said, as infrastructure and connectivity is so important for regional integration in BIMSTEC, can the panelists come up with a consensus and practical list of points that this forum can put forward to the forthcoming summit? Actually, Mr. Bhandari, in the concluding session, we are trying to come up with some summary note of this, the discussion of this second Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue, and definitely that infrastructure part would be highlighted there. So Nihal, we don't see any other question. So if you want to raise any further question, or if you want to summarize and wrap up, I think that would be great. Or any other participants, if you want to add anything, please do so. We still have some more time.
Yeah, let's try to entertain at least one or two questions if they have. But I think overall, until that happens, is there anybody there with their hands up?
I don't see any hands up, but
I think I should make a very important point, and I'm glad, Salim, that we will have that sort of concluding major points, major takeaways that we'll take up to the BIMSTEC summit, and sort of find a way to sort of socialize those ideas somehow. But at least if we have that from technical aspects of what's coming out of the summit, the forum, that will certainly help. There are quite a few still unanswered questions about, we spoke about Indonesia, we spoke about, perhaps Malaysia and Thailand, but Thailand, by merely having Thailand on board, it sort of gives a little bit of a pathway for BIMSTEC countries. And one of the other motivations that I wanted to sort of highlight that it shouldn't be a secret anymore, the South Asia's integration itself within the BIMSTEC is also very critical. I mean, India's integration in Bangladesh and the others. I think we analytically should explore all these aspects, and perhaps soon, both the BIMSTEC ones that we just for the information of the participants, we have a series of analytical papers that has been launched under the SANEM network funded by the USAID, and we have sort of a very discrete set of papers targeting the themes of integration, regional integration. Professor Salim Rehan is spearheading that, and few of us are engaged in the team, including value chains and regional infrastructure connectivity. But I think it looks like out of these discussions we're having, Salim, that there is scope for expanding our analytical base into a couple of new areas. So that's actually can be determined by the outcome at the end of our forum, that where do we think that we can add value with additional analysis. I will leave you with that thought.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nihal Pitigala. And I don't see any other questions and comments. I think there is a question. Paras, he asked to Dr. Probir, any idea of the state of play in the negotiation? Paras, why don't you, is it Paras? Can unmute and ask this question to Probir.
Yeah. Thanks, Salim. Probir, Dr. Probir, I came across a news story that officials are about to sign on to BVI and MVA protocol, right? Because without a protocol, you cannot operationalize it. But then we have been hearing about officials being close to a deal several times. So are they really about to sign it? Or are there any issues? Are you privy to it? Because I am not.
Dr. Probir, yes, please.
Just to quickly add that these agreements, on the BBIN, Motor Vehicle Agreement, now we call BIN. And the texts, the protocol text, there are 3 protocols been finalized, and hopefully the leaders will take a call at an appropriate time. And so that much I can only add. I am not part of the negotiation process, but once I was looking at some study for them. But it's media news and the press release, the joint statement, the three countries clearly indicate that the text has been finalized, and hopefully, BBIN coming with the motor vehicle agreement, implementing it at a very faster manner, because signing agreement, ratifying the protocols, and implementation, it takes enormous time. There are many examples, protocols ratified, but implementation hasn't happened in that speedy manner. So more quickly we do it, that is better, and BIMSTEC process, SART process, and many others will get new momentum. So that much, I can only add. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prabir. I can see Arnav. He probably has some more information on that updated one. Yes.
I just wanted to, respond on this question of role of state. And in this regard, the important is whenever we go for an agreement, like a BIN agreement, which is a kind of a regional agreement, we have to have the border states in consensus with the overall goal of the policy. Because, for example, say trucks are going to pass through the Petrapol is one of the busiest borders, and it's in West Bengal. Now, if the protocols are not in line, or they are adversely affecting the stakeholders who are used to trading through Petrapol, then there will be resistance at the grassroots level. That's one. Now, in India, we have the national government, they are building national highways. Now, they need to have proper state highways as well, connecting the nodes, the origins and destinations. So there, the role of state governments becomes extremely important. In terms of infrastructure development, in terms of facilitation, the role of state governments, and in Nepal, so there are the provincial governments. In Bangladesh also, they have the regional governments. So these would have to be in line with the national policies and the guidelines, the vision of the national policies and guidelines. Otherwise, there will be resistance at the grassroots level.
Thank you, Arnav. I think we have some questions or comments, and probably one question is for Dr. Prabir, is that what role BIMSTEC plays in India's Act East policy? And I think Dr. Ganeshan can also respond to that too. And Vinod Menon, he said that given the I think it's a comment, given the multi-hazard risk and vulnerability profiles of BIMSTEC member countries, the strengthening of critical infrastructure becomes extremely significant. Intergovernment platforms must address this on priority basis based on the experience of the Indian Ocean, tsunami of 2004, cyclone Nargis in Myanmar 2008, Nepal earthquake 2015, and recurring flood cyclones, etc. So yes, I think if Dr. Prabir can respond to that Act East policies and how can BIMSTEC, what role BIMSTEC can play.
Well, Act East policy and BIMSTEC are, and really they are connected, but BIMSTEC has a no role actually in India's Act East policy. Act East policy, which is in India's a move to connect economically, politically, and strategically with the neighbors in the Eastern world. What is Act East policy? Just as you know that most of the Indians, they rise in the morning and they rise in towards the sun, that is in the east. So that's what it comes with the look East and Act East. It is, I can only add, but how much it is coming into an economic, relations that you have seen with the statistics and other things. But I don't think very much BIMSTEC as an organization has any role in re-energizing or motivating on the Act East. Rather, I would say that India's Act East policy, BIMSTEC is very much an integral component. Thank you.
So, Dr. Nihal, if we agree, shall we go back to the panelists for very concluding remarks?
Yeah.
Dr. Ganeshan,
I'll get started with you.
Yes.
Sorry, should I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Why not? Yes. Please.
So I think this infrastructure connectivity is obviously very important, and I think the numbers are affordable. That $110 billion per year in BIMSTEC for the regional projects, I think, is an affordable number. It's 1/3 of Bangladesh's GDP, which can be financed if we have the proper mechanisms. And the benefit to cost ratio, the benefits are 8, the cost is only 1. And I think that's another very important point. And this soft and hard infrastructure is critical. And the last point I want to make is, I think, the point that has been raised. I think the big countries, India and Thailand, really have to do a lot of the heavy lifting if they want the small countries to follow suit. And part of that is financing the infrastructure and coordinating some of this. But also, I think, to provide these regional public goods, there's a question in the chat about disaster risk management, and that's a very important low-hanging fruit. Another one, I think, is special and differential treatment with market access. I think these are serious issues if we want BIMSTEC to go forward. Thank you so much.
Shall we go to, thank you, Dr. Ganeshan. Shall we go to Paras?
Thanks, Amin. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Prabir De?
I have nothing to add, Salim Bhai. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Before I give the floor back to the,
I think you can.
I just want to, yes, just want to add one thing, that what we are seeing, we talked about this regional public good, this regional infrastructure and connectivity. Now, when it comes to investment, Dr. Ganeshan Vigraja, he very nicely pointed out the kind of resources requirement, and probably the kind of conservative estimates show that it's not that huge, it's not that scary. But who are investing? In India, we can see that probably they are investing quite a lot on their own. But in countries like Bangladesh or Nepal, it's some of the development partners, like Asian Development Bank, part of their SASEC and several other projects, they are doing that. So we need the kind of coordination. And so that's what I gave the example that, while in the matching, when it comes to matching the infrastructure development, on the one side, probably you see the development, not on the other side. How do we can really connect the dots? I think this will be very, very extremely important in the coming days. Over to you, Chair. Dr. Niyapiti.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail in the head in the last statement, Salim, that coordination is, from the public perspective, it has to become very important. I mean, this is something that we can sort of raise it as a point in our concluding remarks. So with that, I mean, it has been very enthralling session all around. A lot of we managed to stick to our theme, so that is great, and we sort of got a lot of aspects out of it. Great insights. All I can say is thank you very much for staying around and participating. And if there's any other further questions you need to ask, please fire to the panelists. You have their links, you have their email addresses as well. Don't hesitate to do that. This is a process we keep learning from each other as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Niyapiti Gala. Thank all the panelists on behalf of SANEM and the partner.
Thank you.
We'll have 2 more sessions, actually 3 more sessions today. The next session will start at 3 o'clock Bangladesh time. But we'll close the Zoom now and restart the same Zoom link at 2 o'clock. So, or 2:30. So please join us there. And the next session will be on people-to-people contacts. And we have some distinguished speakers from the region. We'll have trade and investment. We'll also have very distinguished speakers from this region. We'll be speaking on that. And very finally, we'll have a closing session where we'll try to present a summary of the 2 days discussion, a draft summary. But we'll try to work on this further too before we share this summary note to the delegations in the summit, which is going to take place towards the end of this month. Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks all the panelists. Thank you. And all the participants too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.